Yes team, what is happening? Welcome back to a new training. So in today's training, I'm going to be going through how to fuel for your events, whether it's half marathon, marathon, Hyrox. This can be applied across the board. And we're going to break it down into how much, how long, what to do, common mistakes. So by the end of this training, you'll know exactly what you need to do going into your next event. So let me just bring you over to my iPad and then we can get into it. So I've had to do it a little bit different. So if it looks a little bit off grainy, it's because I'm having a little bit of an issue with my iPad. But it looks okay. We can work with it. It's absolutely fine. So first and foremost, as I said, fueling for marathon events, usually it's going to be anything that's over 90 minutes, which is going to be a Hyrox, half, a marathon. Yes, a Hyrox is probably going to be less for some people, that's fine, but the intensity is really, really high, so it still remains the same. What I mean is you don't really need to fuel up for like a 10K or anything like that. Probably the morning of, that's probably it, which we'll go through all that in a second. So first and foremost, I want you to bring it to this bit, which is a little bit of a graph. So basically the amount of carbs that you need will go up depending on the distance of the race. So as I said there, like if you are doing a half marathon, you might require that much carbs. If you're doing a full marathon, you might require that much carbs. Anything realistically under there, you don't really need to fuel up for that. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Only if you've got a Hyrox, half marathon or marathon, which I've spoke about there. So one of the big things is like, how do you actually carb load properly? I think that's a big question because people just assume that's meant to say you're dieting calories. People just assume that in order to carb load, you just need to eat more. So it's I need to eat more, I need to eat loads, and that's going to be me fueling up. To an extent, that's right, but a lot of people get this wrong, which we'll go through. And then on the flip side of that, people assume that if they have one big meal, then that's going to be sufficient enough for now, which again is not the case. So the big thing that you want to think about is that at the moment, you might be on your dieting calories here. Your protein will be like 1 gram per pound, which is something that we use on average. So, you know, if you're 100 kilos, 200 pound, 200 grams, you might have a little bit more carbs. And then obviously the fat that you have will basically fill up any extra calories that you have. That's how it sort of works to add up. So fats, carbs, and protein make up calories basically. So obviously, when you're carb loading, you want to be a little bit different than that. You don't want just to add carbs on top of this like that. It's not the case because what will happen is in every meal, there's going to be not just carbs, there's going to be a little bit of protein, and there's going to be a little bit of fat. So what happens is that goes up, that goes up, that goes up, and you just end up eating a lot more, which is not just simply not the case. Whereas what you want to sort of do is think about it like this. So we'll go into the formulas in a second of what to use, but realistically, you want somewhere between 8 to 10 grams per kg of body weight. So I'll use me, if I'm close to 100 kilos, for easy numbers, that's around 800 to 1,000 grams of carbs, and that's going to be dictated depending on the event, whether that's a half marathon, whether it's a full marathon, or whether it's a Hyrox, which we'll come on to in a second. So again, carbs have got 4 calories per gram. So when you think about it like that, we're talking already, what's that, like 3,500 to 4,000 calories just from carbs. Just quite a lot of carbs and quite a lot of calories. So you can see why when you're pushing up on these days, your carbs are going to be well up there, and you want to try and minimize the amount of protein and fats that you're having for this specific event. Because, as I said, it all contains each other. Some contain carbs, some contain fat. So you want to try and minimize that without this jumping up too high either, because that's going to push calories really high, that's going to give you distress in your gut, and that's also going to stop you from being able to consume that many carbs, because if you've carb loaded in the past, it's actually quite hard to eat that much food. So just something to think about with that. So as I said, realistically what we're doing is we're thinking of calories will go up, obviously, because of the carbs, but the main goal is to get them carbs in there. So whether it is 800, 1,000, whatever, based on your body weight, that is the sole purpose. And that's where you have to be strategic with the foods that you're consuming, where that carbs are coming from, without having too much protein, without having too much fats. So for example of this is a great meal is a bagel with jam. Loads of carbs in there, but again, with the bagel, it's going to carry a little bit of protein, and there's got to be the odd little traces of fat as well. So you're always going to carry that with it, but majority of the time you want to try and get that in there. And this is the first time where you probably have to think about, when you're making a meal, not centering it around protein. So say you've got a pasta dish, you want to drop the protein and increase the carbs. That meal will be more pasta but less protein, which again is something opposite than what you're probably usually used to doing. So it can take a little bit of thought. It's not just a case of eating more food. So hopefully that makes sense. So we come down to here, like, let's talk about before the event. So how many days before, how long before? Realistically, if it's a half marathon or a Hyrox, you want to be probably 1 day out. So for simple sake, if it's on a Sunday, you just probably want to have this higher carb day on a Saturday. And then if it's more of a marathon or, even longer, like an ultra, you're talking 2 to 3 days, depending on experience, depending on what your body can handle. But realistically, 2 days out is going to be the best, because what we've found is 48 hours to 36 hours before is the sweet spot for them carbs that you're going to be consuming to be utilized on race day. So that's where you basically want to start, either a day before or 2 days before. And again, with a marathon, you can manipulate it a little bit, where you might do 2 8-gram days, you might do an 8-gram and then a 10-gram day per kg, depending on what your stomach can handle. But again, this comes down to experience over time of doing it as well. The next thing you want to think about is the night before the race. So again, this is where you want to sort of have, I find it like you want to have a little bit of a ritual. Sorry, because I've had to screenshot this. It's messing it about a little bit. You want to have a little bit of a ritual. So what I mean by that is like what you go to. And mine's a Maggi fu. So mine's always like a Chinese dish, which is a rice dish. So like salt and pepper chicken with fried rice or boiled rice, because it's going to be really high in carbs. It's going to be really high in sodium. Stop moving. Really high in sodium, which again is going to help me with electrolyte replenishing, fueling, etc., which again I'll come on to in a second. But you also want to make sure that it's easy to digest and you don't have the shits the next day, basically. So anything that you're used to having, you want to be having that. Don't just want to be going out for a pizza for the sake of it, because with a pizza, people think, yeah, it's got loads of carbs in, but it's also got a lot of fat in. So you want to try and have just the carb portion. And the good go-to meal I would suggest for anyone, if you're new to this, is a pasta dish with a garlic bread. Is absolutely perfect. Loads of carbs. Yes, it's got a little bit of fat in, but mostly just pure carbs, which again is going to be great. From electrolyte perspective, realistically, I think you should be, if you're doing any sort of endurance event anyway, you should be taking some sort of electrolytes daily, just to replenish the sweat that you lose, basically, to help you with your muscles function at their most optimal. Allows with contractions and stuff like that through the muscle. So if you're lacking in electrolytes, that's when cramps start to happen. That's when you might have a little bit of gut distress, and performance is just naturally down anyway. So you should be taking it daily. Again, you can get a decent electrolyte scoop, usually around, I think they're around 500 milligrams on like a daily dose. Again, My Protein do it, Builder do it, loads of different places do it. But going into the race, you're going to be a little bit more strategic with it. So you'll need more electrolytes the more that you sweat. I don't know what that line was. So for me, I have between 500 and 1500 milligrams of sodium or electrolytes. I go with the upper end of 1500 because I sweat a lot and I'm a bigger guy. So I said someone who's 97, 96 kilos requires more fueling, basically because I'm a bigger person. But if you're on a smaller side, maybe you're 50 to 80 kilos, you might require less than that. But again, it comes down to what you do. If you're not a big sweater, you might require a little bit less. If you are a big sweater, you might require a little bit more. But 1500 is the most I've found, and you can get that from Precision Hydration. So I use that at every race, and I usually take that like the same as when I carb load. So 2 days out or 1 day out. But again, more's going to be beneficial. So probably the last 4 or 5 days leading up to it, you want to start to get them electrolytes into your system and keep on top of fluids as much as possible. So hopefully that makes sense with that. Then you're moving on to the day of, so the morning of. Usually the race is going to be in the morning time, unless it's a Hyrox, it might be at a different point, but the same principle applies. You want to have a meal which is low in fat and low in fiber, because again, that can sit on your gut, and again, it might be a little bit harder to digest. But what you want to have to is, what is your go-to meal? And again, this is where the ritual things comes into play. Again, you want a good amount of carbs in the system. So for me, it's always a case of having a bagel or 2 bagels, depending, with jam. Some people have honey and banana for that meal, and then usually it is like a carb drink. So Lucozade is a carb drink, which again is absolutely fine, but you can get like specific carb drinks, which is called dextrose or maltodextrin. Again, they actually sell this on like My Protein and stuff like that, and it's really, really cheap. But I just mix that with your electrolytes, and you've got another 50, 60 grams of carbs in the system as well. But again, what you want to think about is, what is your go-to meal? What can I digest so you don't have to go to the toilet? What do I enjoy to eat? And what do I know is just going to sit absolutely fine on me? So that's what you want to think about the morning of. Again, don't really need to overcomplicate that. And you usually want to have that around 2 hours before. Again, you can think about it a little bit more. Fluid-wise, you probably want to stop consuming fluids around 30 minutes before, or 60 minutes before, depending on how scared you are to go to the toilet. If you have go to the toilet, if you haven't got options to go to the toilet, all that sort of stuff, because as you start to pile in more fluid, you're obviously going to need to go for a wee at some point, and maybe worse, a poop. So the next thing then is to go into what you do during the race. And we're going to keep this really, really simple. I like to take gels, or I recommend taking gels every 30 to 40 minutes. And what I mean by gels is you can get gels, which are a carb source, so a carb gel. But you can also get like chews, which again is a carb source. You can also get sweets or actual food, which is a carb source. But realistically, you want to try and take your carb source, which is mostly going to be carb gels, every 30 to 40 minutes. And for me, I usually take them every 6K when I'm running. So I just know what that sort of looks like at what point. With Hyrox, I do see people having a gel like halfway through or 20 minutes in. But for me, I've never really taken one. So that's a preference to you depending on what you require. So I said with the half marathon, for example, you'd have it at 6, you'd have it at 12, you'd have it at 18, and then that would tie over for the 21. Again, with the Hyrox, it might be a case of yes or no. It's just really depending on, can you hold on? Do you really need one? When you're going to stop to take it? A lot of people take it after like the rower, just because they're getting the breath back there, and it gives you a little bit of boost going into the back end of the race. You can do that as well, but again, it's just a preference to if you want to do that. Nice and simply, same with electrolytes. You want to be Hyrox, you can't. They do have them on station, electrolytes. I would definitely recommend taking them if you feel like you do cramp up quite often. And with running, you probably want to take, again, I usually have 1500 milligrams in a bottle that I will sip on throughout that race. And again, I'll always have another 1500 milligrams in reserve as well if I need to. But realistically, depending on how long the race is, if it's a half marathon, you'll be fine. It'll get you through it with no electrolytes. If it's a marathon, you probably need it for the back end of the race, if that makes sense. And then after the race, again, is often neglected. People go for the pints and stuff like that, which I'm all about. The 3 R's, basically, the rule is refuel. So you want to have carbs. Nice and simple. You've lost loads of carbs from the running or the event. You want to replenish them carbs. Repair, protein. Again, it's pretty hard to be protein after doing something like that, I'll be honest. But if you're thinking about optimization, protein to repair the muscle tissue, and then rehydrate, again, don't miss out on your electrolytes, because I guarantee the night of you won't be able to sleep because you'll be dying for a drink. So the 3 R's is a great rule to think about: repair, refuel, and rehydrate, nice and simply. And then lastly, the buyback method. So you'll hear a lot of people saying like, should I eat more calories? Should I buy them back after doing like, especially in training runs, if you're in a fat loss phase or something, you know, if your training runs are going up to like half marathon and stuff like that. And then again, this is one of them fitness answers of it depends. But a good rule of thumb is like, obviously, if you think about it, you would have been consuming carbs beforehand, which are going to be more than your maintenance. You're going to be consuming carbs during, so your total calories for the week are going to be up anyway. So the fuel that you're thinking of buying back, you already had. So you don't always have to buy back, I don't think. But if you do feel like you need to buy back, a good rule of thumb is buying back around 50 to 75% of what your watch or your wearable tells you that you've burnt in calories. So again, easy rule of thumb, if you've burnt 1,000 calories for that run, you could buy back 500 to 750 calories on top of your normal calories. Again, but that's just up to you. What you'll sort of notice as well is like, you know, if I'm doing a marathon, I think a marathon I burn like 3,000, maybe a bit more. I think it was more closer to 4. To buy back, if I was dieting, I wouldn't really be fussed about that, do you know what I mean? Because I knew that if I was going out that day, I would be absolutely fine. So it just depends on usually your initiative. If the goal is to constantly drop body fat and just the race is the race, buyback method do you need it? Can you get away with, like, realistically, from a normal person's perspective, you're gonna have something to eat after the race, which is not gonna be a dieting food. So it might be a meal out, it might be a burger, it might be a pizza, and there's gonna be enough calories in that to have, which are already about bought back calories. So you don't really have to think about this too much, because I think it happens anyway, just from my experience of doing it myself and coaching others. But if you need to buy it back, feel free to buy it back. Hope that helps. So I said a few different things to look at there, but the bigger thing that I want to get into your head is the actual carb loading properly. So I said, make sure that you're not just focused purely on calories in, you're focusing on, first and foremost, the grams per kg. That'll dictate how many carbs you have for the day, and then that'll dictate what happens with your calories and your protein and your fats. So hopefully that helps. If you've got any questions off the back of that, drop me a message, and yeah, smash your event. Let's go.